Stencils are not just for walls and crafting. I'm going to show you how to up-level the stencil to the fine art realm and show you how to create amazing effects with this simple stencil. Let's get going. Here are the stencils that I'm using, and you can get them from Etsy, from your local art store, or from Amazon. So I'm mixing up here a medium dark color, and that's going to be in the background, and I want the color to create a little bit of depth, and so I'm going to start dark and then work lighter as I continue to work on the piece. I am working on acrylic paper. It's Strathmore 400 series. And you have to gesso it first. You could also use watercolor paper. And I like to tape off my sides so I get a nice little frame. And you just want to cover the surface here in this first layer. On this side, I decided to put several different values on as the background. So I'm mixing in that same blue-green color, but then mixing in some white and just going to sort of play around with having different colors here and having a little bit more of a dynamic background to start off with. I'm also using my fingers to mix the different areas of color, and I'm trying to blend between those areas here. I'm using my fingers because it's getting rid of the brush marks, and also it gives a lot of nice gesture and movement to the background here. Once you finish your background, go ahead and dry it, and that way you'll have a really dry underlayer and you won't risk removing paint as you continue to work. Also, if your bottom layer is not dry, it can also get kind of muddy, so it's nice to have that first layer be really dry. And on this left piece, I'm going to go ahead and add the stencil in as part of the background. So the stencil is going to go in first, and I decided to just use one color here for the stencil to start off with. And I'm using a stippling brush. Stippling brushes are very hard bristle. They are flat on the bottom, and they are really good for stencils because they help to get into all the little areas there. If you don't have a stippling brush, just use a hard bristle brush, and that will do the job. And you'll just get less leaking outside of the stencil if you use a brush like this. And as you can see, I'm trying to really cover and just get every single little spot filled because this is going to be my background. I'm going to cover over it, so I want a really good coverage for the background. And it came out really nice and clear, and so now I'm going to go back to the other painting. And I mixed up this really beautiful yellow-green color, and again, because that background's dry, that yellow-green's not mixing in with the background, and we're creating another layer on top. So just using a hard bristle Escoda brush, using a flat brush here, and just laying in some darks and some lights just to create some different contrasting values and a little bit of drama, and just to kind of have a little variety in this background here. Adding a bit of lighter colors now, because again, when we have the lighter colors, they appear as if they are moving forward in the picture plane. So I always like to add white to whatever color is my base color that I'm using. And what I'm trying to do is add in some big shapes and kind of have that root the piece. And I'm using my putty spreader here to kind of just do a little blending and just sort of mess up those layers a little bit, just make it a little bit more interesting. And so just trying to get a pleasing composition here where we have a bit of contrast. And here I am using a palette knife to scumble. When you put some paint on your palette knife and just push lightly like that, it's called scumbling. And now I'm back to drying. So I really want this layer to be dry before I go into the next layer. And now I'm going to mix up a lighter color, and I'm going to add some water into this paint because I'm going to make a wash. And a wash is a thin layer. I want to show the layer under. So I'm going to work on the left painting, and I want to show that stencil. So I'm getting a little worried here that I'm using too much water. So I use my Golding wetting agent, and the wetting agent, what it does is has a chemical in there which preserves the pigment a little bit better. And so it doesn't like wash out the pigment as much as just water. Flow release is actually one of my favorite painting mediums, and if you don't know about acrylic mediums, I've got a great resource for you. It's called 5 Acrylic Mediums Every Artist Should Have, and it's a PDF, and I also have a video. It's a private video I host on YouTube, and it shows you how to use these mediums. They are really game changers in acrylic painting, so look in the link in the description for those resources. And you can see I've got a really nice thin layer there. I sprayed a little bit of water on top just to get some interesting little bubbles. And I'm going to let that dry while I work on the other side here. So I've got a new stencil. And I'm not using my stippling brush here, take note. And look how it didn't really show up that well. So, you know, I'm going to have to try that again or get a little thicker with the paint. And this one worked a little better, but it's almost too thick in some areas. So I'm doing a little bit of blotting out here with a paper towel. And, you know, don't be scared to get a paper towel and wipe things out. Acrylic is really forgiving like that. So now I've got another stencil, and that one came out really well. I'm really happy with how that came out, really sharp look here. And then I'm doing this same stencil over here, but notice how glopped up it is. Okay, so my brush was probably too wet. And so I'm going to give that a try again. Just wipe that right out. Now, I couldn't have wiped out like that if that under layer wasn't dry. So let's see how it turns out with this second run here. And it's better, but I still don't love it. So I use my putty spreader just to get rid of that. And there's a little hint of the stencil still, but I wasn't loving it the way it was. Now we're back on the left side here, creating this purple little kind of hill of sorts. And you can see that there's some water in my paint, and it's, you know, if you look really carefully there, it's kind of like splitting a little bit, and you can see the underlayer, which is really cool. So getting back into the palette knife here, applying thicker paint. Look at those ridges you can get when you apply your paint with the palette knife and go thickly. Really just nice to have some contrast between the brush, between your fingers and a palette knife, wiping away like I just did, using the palette knife to paint with. So just really playing here and doing a variety of marks, but again, laying in big shapes. We need to dry our layer, and the thing is with acrylic paint, it's so nice because it does dry fast, and so we can do many layers on top of each other. And I think that's what makes an abstract painting really interesting, is when you have all these layers on top of each other. So I'm trying that stencil again and going with a little lavender color here. And again, I've got a stencil brush, a stippling brush. It's a smaller version. So let's see if I get a better application, and it is a little better. You can see that. So it does pay to get a stippling brush if stencils are something that you want to try out. Now I'm using my circle stencil. I love this one. And this one is giving me some bigger shapes and more solid shapes so I can create some contrast, because the background has a lot of small little forms, but also it's a little, you know, blurry and blendy. And so I'm just trying to create a little bit of a pop and maybe a bit of a focal point. So now I'm adding sand to my paint. That's just play sand. You can buy it online or at your local, you know, hardware store. And I'm using my palette knife, as you can see, to put the sandy paint right onto the stencil. And this is super fun to do. Check that out. Now look at the difference between that, the green color and the blue color with the stencil at the bottom there. How the texture is contrasting and the color as well. And then I just added white to that same color, and I'm just creating some different marks to create harmonious colors. Instead of mixing up a whole new color, let's just use that same color and make different variations of it using white or maybe any of the other colors I have in my palette. And so now I'm adding a bit more black back in. So you can see I've got that black stencil in the background on the bottom right, and I'm feeling like I need a little bit of more dark and a little bit more of a pop. I actually had a teacher once say, if you don't know how to finish an abstract painting, add black. Scratching into the paint here with my palette knife, just trying to create a real wide variety of effects. So I'm going back to the painting on the left here, using that same stencil I started with. So I'm wanting to bring this design back forward again, because the background, you know, it's really kind of behind there, and I thought it'd be interesting to add the stencil back in the foreground. So, you know, just doing a little bit more play here and doing some more scumbling and wiping away, and just let yourself play and have a lot of fun and just try all different kinds of things to create an interesting surface. I'm going back to using my fingers for blending here to bring in just a little bit more maybe like gestural type marks, or just to blend in a different way to create a different effect. And that's kind of it. Now, ideally, you wait until it's totally dry before you take the tape off, and I actually did wait until it was dry. And then when you take the tape off, look at the cool little frame that we get. It really makes the piece look more professional.